ever since the first astronauts of Apollo 11 set foot on the moon, NASA has promised even greater achievements, including returning to the moon and sending humans to Mars. But after all this time, NASA has yet to turn that grand vision into reality. There were a total of 6 NASA missions to the moon from 1969 to 1972. However, since then, this American agency has had no plans to repeat the feat. A few years ago, NASA surprisingly announced they would send astronauts back to the moon. This program is named Artemis, a mission to land the first woman and the next man on the moon to carry out important tasks. If successful, this mission would mark the second moon landing since 1972. First, we must understand how humans landed on the moon before they stopped going. Apollo's success is tied to the circumstances of its birth. The mission occurred at the peak of the Cold War when the US wanted to demonstrate superior strength over the Soviet Union. One of the most closely watched races was the space race. President Kennedy's advisors at the time said the best way to beat the Soviets was to put a man on the moon. In 1962, in a speech at Rice University, Kennedy publicly declared the goal of landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade. With immense patriotic spirit, the U.S. Congress approved and supported this idea. Government funding poured into NASA increased from $500 million in 1960 to over $5 billion in 1965, accounting for 4.31% of the total federal budget. This figure was astronomically large. Remember, today, NASA receives only about 0.5% of the federal budget each year. However, not everyone supported the project. Throughout the 1960s, 60% of Americans opposed the government for spending too much money on it. There was a time Congress wanted to cut funding, and even Kennedy grew concerned about Apollo's difficulties. In 1963, Kennedy was assassinated. Afterwards, Johnson affirmed that Kennedy's ambitious dream would become reality. Immediately, Johnson demanded increased funding for NASA and maintained support for the Apollo program through the Apollo 11 mission. And as promised, the first human on another world, an American, landed on the moon in 1969. That was the Apollo 11 mission. However, Apollo 17 completed its mission and returned to Earth in December 1972, marking the 6th and final moon mission of the Apollo project. This remains the last record of humans setting foot on the moon. The question is, if humanity's scientific knowledge about the moon was still so limited, why did the U.S. alone suspend its moon landing program? According to the U.S. government, NASA ended moon missions due to tight finances. But were there other reasons? The truth is, skepticism about Apollo 11 persists even now. The Apollo 11 moon landing occurred on July 20, 1969. Over 500 million people worldwide watched because the event was broadcast live. However, as early as the 1970s, many argued that NASA and related agencies had spread fake news, fabricating the moon landing to achieve their political goals. Theories about the truth of this story remain of public interest even half a century later. Some Russians even called it America's Great Hoax. Conspiracy theories claim the moon landing was a deception staged by the U.S. government to win the intensely tense space race with the Soviet Union during the 1960s-70s. Although these claims are completely baseless, they persist stubbornly to this day. Meanwhile, NASA states that debating this topic insults the hundreds of thousands of people who worked tirelessly for years to create some of America's greatest historical achievements. It also insults the memory of those who dedicated their entire lives to the mission of space exploration. As for why humans haven't returned to the moon, it's not a technology problem, it's a funding issue. On average, from the first Apollo mission to Apollo 17, each program cost about $10 billion USD. But this is a conversion from 2005, according to a recent article I read. Adjusted for today, the figure would undoubtedly be much larger. The biggest barrier to humans returning to the moon is economics. Even for the world's top economy, the US, the program had to end due to its enormous cost. According to a law signed by President Donald Trump in 2017, NASA's annual budget is about $19.05 billion USD, potentially increasing to $19.09 billion in subsequent years. That sounds like a lot, but consider the current projects they must pursue, including the James Webb Space Telescope, the rocket launch system, missions to the Sun, Jupiter, Mars, asteroid belts, the Kuiper Belt, and other regions of the solar system. Even with today's vastly advanced aerospace technology, funding remains a massive challenge for scientists aiming to reach the moon again. Secondly, there's no longer a clear scientific purpose. Decided to invest heavily in the space program in the late 1960s and 70s to outpace the Soviet Union and affirm its status as the world's top technological power during the Cold War. But after Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon, Americans realized the program, costing tens of billions, didn't create a decisive advantage over the Soviets. As some might cynically say, it wasn't worth the cost. In 1972, President Richard Nixon decided to end the Apollo program because it was no longer necessary. Therefore, for a nation to land on the moon for scientific research or to assert power is no longer essential. They can apply the technological achievements from the Apollo project, and they don't necessarily need to send people. They can send machines and bring back what humans need. Furthermore, the world context has changed. The Cold War ended, and the technology race between the two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union, is over. Consequently, humanity lacks a clear, compelling purpose to go back to the moon. Funding and political opposition aren't the only reasons humans haven't returned to the moon. In reality, this satellite can be a very dangerous place to approach, and we must not underestimate it. Humans also stop going due to fear of accidents and the immense pressure. First, the lunar surface has many craters and rugged terrain, making landing hazardous. For the 1969 mission, the US invested what would be billions today just to develop a satellite to remap the moon and ensure the Apollo landers' safety. According to the app, the first test of the Apollo spacecraft in 1967 killed all 3 astronauts. The Space Shuttle Challenger accident in 1986 also killed 7 crew members, becoming a national trauma. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated upon re-entry, killing 7 more. In a 2015 accident, the unmanned SpaceX Dragon spacecraft and its Falcon 9 rocket exploded minutes after launch. These represent the enormous risks for participants in space exploration programs. Nevertheless, other nations still aim to send people to the moon. Almost every one of his videos is related to money. The next thing that helped Mr. Beast succeed easily is the content, being incredibly crazy and unique. For example, look at his video about a real-life squid game, one of the most famous videos on YouTube. Bizarre content, dangerous challenges, and clever pranks. China plans to land humans on the moon by 2030, according to their announcements. As early as late 2020, China became the world's 3rd country to return samples from the moon to Earth with its Chang'e 5 mission, and it also planted its flag on the lunar surface. It remains to be seen how far China's ambitions will go and to what extent they will succeed. Thanks for watching this story. If you found it interesting, please subscribe to Why Logie Explained, turn on notifications, and share it. For now, we'll say goodbye. To support the Why Logie Explained team, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Wishing you all the best, and see you again.